Hello to all our friends, family, and loved ones in the Artful Chiropractor Podcast world. This is Dr. Lance Von Stade. A little different voice than you're used to hearing in the introductions of these podcast episodes, but this is also a different type of podcast episode than you're used to hearing here. I get to flip the script on now Dr. Raymond Daniels, and he's in the hot seat. I've been looking forward to doing this for a long time, and I know that Ray has as well. And I imagine a lot of you have been waiting for the opportunity to see inside of this man's mind. He's done so much to contribute to the profession, and especially in the Kairos training culture community. He's really been a source of inspiration for people who have felt like they're practicing on islands, looking to someone in the world who is going through what they're going through. And Ray has such a humble way about him. I'm so proud to be able to put the spotlight on him for a second and get to shine the things that I know about him, but show to you guys how much work he's put in, but that he really has been fighting against a lot of resistance for a long time and is now reaping the rewards of his work ethic. So in this episode, you will hear some of the background story of where he gets that work ethic from, his baseball and football career and some coaches that inspired him, some drills he had to do to get through that, what he went through school, basically what he put himself through in school, because not everyone goes the path that Ray has chosen to go. And therefore, not everyone is the quality of person that Ray has become. And you also hear now how he's using his Kairos training, his upper cervical training, his communication training, and all the takeaways he's had from the episodes and people he's met through this podcast now as he serves people with his mentor, Dr. Rick Swecker, at Family First Chiropractic in Reno, his hometown. So it's such a great story arc, I feel, that knowing where he came from Reno, not knowing where he was going to end up, and after all the training, all the interviews, all the exposure to chiropractic across the world, he still ends up choosing to go back home where he began his journey. And I think you're going to love the episode. I think we'll glean a lot of insights from Ray and understanding of Ray, and I think it's going to bring a higher quality of podcast moving forward. He talks a little bit about the vision and where we're going from here. And without further ado, I love you all. Enjoy the episode. Here is Dr. Raymond Daniels. Good? So good?
So good.
We're jumping in.
All right, let's do it.
Raymond Daniels, welcome to the Artful Chiropractor Podcast.
Dr. Lance Von Stade, thank you so much for having me and allowing me the opportunity to be on the other end.
Yeah, man. Did I say Dr. Raymond Daniels?
No, you just went Raymond Daniels.
Dude, look at me, the first opportunity I get, and I blow it. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody in the world, Dr. Raymond Daniels is on the podcast, in the hot seat. I've been looking forward to this moment for, it feels like years at this point. I don't know how long we've been doing this thing, but at least 80 episodes, and I'm so pumped to have you here, man.
I'm excited to be here, man. It's crazy to look back at the journey and what we've been able to accomplish and the guests that we've had on, and it's been so fun, especially thinking about when it all started. Just me getting care from you and talking about podcasts, and then the next thing you know, we're doing it. So it's awesome, man. It's good to be here.
Nice. Can you actually, as a starting point, that's not a bad place to start. Can you relive that moment for people? And what was the birth of this little project, and at least a little more insight on the origin and how it grew?
Exactly. For sure. So it started when actually I went to Life 101 with Life West. It was in my second quarter, and Dr. Kelly's wife, I forget what her name was now. Anyways, at the time, I asked her for more information on just, different awesome chiropractors, and she shared with me the Wellness Guys podcast. And I started listening. That was the first ever podcast that I ever listened to, and I was so inspired by it. I was like, damn, one day I want to do a podcast. And then, flash forward about, I don't know, my fifth or sixth quarter, I think, maybe with you. I was getting care from you, and we were just talking about podcasts, connecting how awesome they were, and how I wanted to start one. And you were saying you guys wanted to start one, and that was the end of that day. And then I came back. I think it was my next visit that I came in that I was getting care from you, and you were like, So, Brett and I really have wanted to start a podcast for a long time, but we don't necessarily have the bandwidth. Would you want to, lead up a podcast for KTC and really take the charge on that? And my gut instinct was like, no way, dude. I'm not I'm not good enough for that. This is an amazing community. I'm not ready for that. But I took it on and I was just so excited. And I was just thinking about too, our first couple of recordings, how brutal they were, but that's where it started, man. It was cool. I just love the opportunity, and the fact that you asked me to do that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, the first episode, every once in a while I'll go back and just like push play on the first episode, listen to the first couple minutes just to remember where we came from and how much we've learned since then. Mm-hmm. Something you just said that I think might be a theme of this interview is your gut instinct telling you I'm not good enough to do that. And I'm curious, how far back has that been an internal message from you? And how the hell have you constantly throughout your entire life overcome that? Because there's no way you could have played competitive baseball as a youngster and then get into college playing baseball and then in school I was just briefly looking through your accolades and accomplishments while in school. And I imagine that many of these things, including being a facilitator, starting the podcast, getting honors, doing student champions for life, all these, every step of the way would have been increasing the requirement of you and requiring a lot of you. How did you overcome all of that? And how was that conversation like when you were younger?
Yeah, that was a deep question, man. But, definitely going back, is probably all the way when I was in my first, second, and third grade. A big one was with school. I, would go through school and then I would have, some challenges, but then I started going to my grandma's house every single day after school, and she started working with me on certain things, and like that was this habit that I had for the next like 3 or 4 years, and just different conversations that I had with her, and she was like, I don't know, constantly encouraging me and letting me know that I was good enough. So it definitely started from that kind of that external, validation of that. And that
what were the certain things that she'd work with you on?
She was the one who taught me how to read and write and, do all these extra things on top of school where like in the beginning I was like, why am I having to do this? But just kind of gave me that extra confidence to keep going through. And that eventually, I had a big identity with sports early on, and, trying to think through overcoming that I'm not good enough. I really overcame that by realizing that work ethic could overcome that. So I just would work a lot harder in sports to overcome that limiting belief. And I think I probably got that from some great coaches that I had. And then early on, just kind of developing the habit of every time I did have that belief of I'm not good enough or I'm not ready, then I could overpower it with like work ethic.
Who's a coach that comes to mind for you that kind of epitomized that, or you think brought that out in you the most? And what did they do? What do you think it was that either they did, they said, how they stood, looked at you, talked to you?
Definitely, and what comes to mind right away is my high school football coach. He was kind of one of those hard asses, old school football coaches, but and he would just run us into the ground, and we would just have this constant, battle of like, we weren't the most talented, but like we were always going to be the ones that worked the hardest. And I was my senior year, and we had some big games. It would be towards the end of the season, but we were conditioning in the summertime, and we would be doing these what were known as gassers. across the field and back under time. And if one person didn't make it, we were all going back again. And we would just go and go and go until everyone's yelling at each other, getting pissed off at the coach in our head. Like I can't, imagine telling him all the things that ran through my head when he was making us run. And a big one was, always finishing through the line. And then we got to these huge games at the end of our season that we weren't expected to win. But every time after we conditioned early on in the summer, he was like, you're going to put this in your back pocket, and when you need it, it's going to come out. And we're going to work that much harder than who we're facing, because they were most likely more talented than we were. But when we need it in the fourth quarter, we were going to pull on that work ethic. And sure enough, we won 2 huge games, and one of them being the first playoff win for the school. So he was the one that really drove into me work ethic. And he really didn't even care about my talent, because by the time high school rolled around, I definitely was talented, but he didn't even care, because he knew that was very superficial. But the work ethic was the one thing that I would be able to carry with the rest of my life.
Yeah, I like that. Put that in your back pocket.
Yeah, and it goes to incredible. What we talk about too with falling to the level of our training. That's definitely stuck with me, and I correlate back to that experience through high school football too.
Nice. And that carried over into baseball as well? Because that's where you kind of had most of your success, at least in the sporting realm.
Yeah, I mean, through high school, I was successful with both football and baseball, and I actually had a big injury with my shoulder my senior year playing football, and that was actually what took me away from wanting to go try and play a football at a smaller school, at a junior college or D3, and then I had more confidence in baseball, just because football, I needed that extra zip that I had, and I felt like I lost it through my senior year, just through the injuries and just crazy amounts of just trying to rehab myself to get me through week by week. Yeah. But it definitely transferred into college baseball, because I ended up playing for a junior college team that was amazing. Bryce Harper was there my freshman year, and then that attracted all these other studs. And I went through so much failure through college baseball, more failure than any success for sure.
Well, you put that in your back pocket. I think that's the failure is the success. I mean, that's to see how your confidence has built even since I've known you, taking on these projects, and to know even sometimes you'd be have a certain guest coming on the podcast, and you'd be excited and nervous, and man, putting a lot of pressure on yourself. And I can definitely see where the carryover of the work ethic would go on, because something I've been looking forward to. One of the reasons I've been looking forward to interviewing you so much is that I think similarly, you maybe not thinking you're good enough, or whether that's just you being humble, you are humble. And I've been looking forward to casting a light on a lot of people thinking, man, I can't believe he did the Artful Chiropractor podcast on top of school. But I also want to highlight some of the other things that you did throughout school. And you already mentioned that you started this your 5th or 6th quarter, but you were also a KTC facilitator. And what quarter did you start facilitating? And what quarter did you start training?
So I started training my very first quarter. Huge shout out to Dr. Katie Stein. I met her at a Champions Weekend before school and just really connected with her. And she asked me about my story and my background, and she's like, and just stayed connected with me. And then before I started school, she was like, I think you'd really love Adjusting Ninjas. Go check it out. So I'm sure I would have eventually found Adjusting Ninjas. It might not have been my first quarter, but I was so glad that she shared that with me. And then I started training right away. Josh Kaya, Joe Zingone, those studs leading the charge.
Yeah, nice.
Darren and Adrian are there too. But so I did my first quarter, and I could only go 2 times a week. So I was a little bummed about that, because I loved it so much. And then my second quarter, I did 4 days a week. Second, third, 4 days a week. And then I think it was my 4th that I started facilitating. And then the days that I wasn't facilitating, I was going to the trainings in the morning for once.
That's awesome, man. And then you also did Student Champions, which some people may not know. If you want to give a rundown of what that is and kind of what the load is like and how that fit into the bigger picture.
Yes. Student Champions, again, having Katie, that's where I met her, and then her influence that she had on me. And I thought that was really cool to be able to do that for incoming students. and just the growth and development. As a student champion, we kind of give tours at the school. We facilitate these champions weekend for prospective students. We have the weekly meetings. You have opportunities to lead the meetings and different things like that. So just leadership positions and constant opportunities to speak in front of a group, speak in front of the whole champions weekend. Those things were way outside my comfort zone. Like I remember thinking about, giving a tour of the school. Like I was stressed out about that. It just was like one or two other people. So I definitely had a lot of growth with that group, and such an awesome community, great people, and, something that I'll continue to be a part of as a doc, trying to get students to, Life West, or just check it out and see if it's for them. But it was a great opportunity.
Cool. So it seems like you had the background of physical training and work ethic ingrained in you young. Then you came into school. Where was that transition of, I guess, what was the moment that you knew you were going to become a chiropractor?
So going back to college, right when I got done playing baseball, I was assuming that I was going to be a physical therapist, because that's kind of what I decided my junior, senior year in high school. That I was like, all right, if baseball didn't work out, if I didn't end up playing on TV someday, I'd have to fall back on something. So PT was it was prestigious to a sense. Like, people respected it. Like, everyone I told, like, oh, that's so great, you'll be great. They make good money, all these different things that are like pretty superficial in terms of deciding a career choice. And then, so once I got done playing baseball my junior year, I started shadowing and doing all the hours to get into grad school, and that's where I really got to like be in the in the game with PTs and really seeing what they're all about in the trenches. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And then, I just was not getting that feeling of like, this is what I wanted to do every day. That was something I prescribed to, because people often said it, but very few people were doing it. But I wanted to find a way where I could do that every day. And I had this one moment where I was already feeling like, I don't think this is for me. And it was probably like my 5th or 6th time shadowing this certain PT. And I asked her if she would go back and do it all over again. Would she make the same decision? And she told me no. And she was really honest, and she didn't want me to sway my decision. But, that was just kind of the icing on the cake for me, that letting me know that, this is not really where I want to go. And I don't want to knock PT, because I have some awesome friends and PTs that I've worked for that, they love what they do. Saying there's some chiropractors that don't love what they do. So it's like, but for me, that was like that piece that was like, okay, I really need to look elsewhere. And that day I called my chiropractor, Rick Swecker, and I've been seeing him since I was 14. And this is, I was 22 at this time, trying to make this decision. I'm like, dude, out of everything you could have done, why did you choose chiropractic? And then 3 minutes over the phone, like, I'm pretty sure that's all the time he had, he like lit up. You could tell he's been waiting 8 years for me to ask him this damn question. And then he just shared this, like, his story, his why, more about chiropractic and the philosophy of it. And then I just remember sitting in my driveway, just like buzzing, because I know that there was a truth that I can't unhear. And that moment forward, he like took me to lunch the next day, and then he answered more of my questions, and then I worked for him for about 1.5 years before I started school, along with a PT clinic at the same time. So it was cool. I was able to see both sides.
Yeah. What was the job that you did at the chiropractic office?
So it was funny. I worked Monday, I don't know, it might have been 3 or 4 days during the week at the PT clinic. And then, because I got that job before Rick offered me, and I was a CA. So I took all the x-rays for them and kind of managed patient flow in the back with Rick. Yeah. And he saw a ton of people on Saturday. It was crazy. He would see upwards of 100 people in like 6 or 7 hours. So wow. That's what I did there. And it was just awesome. Just really confirmed that this is what I want to do.
Cool. Nice, man. So now you're practicing with Rick?
Yeah.
So how has that been? I mean, you're fresh out of school. So this is obviously, our audience is those first 5 years, for the most part, those docs that are out there and in the trenches, in the game. And like, what are you noticing? What are you feeling? What are you needing? What's going on? What's the perspective from where you are now with being so fresh from school?
Yeah, it was interesting too, because when I went off to school, there was a part of me that I was gonna be with them, but right away he was like, dude, like, I'm gonna support you, and of course you'll have a place when you come back here, but like, go explore, do everything, check out all the different techniques, like, and if you get down, you want to open up right next door to us, we'll give you our systems, we'll give you everything you want. So it's just like such an abundant place with me going to school. And then throughout my time at school, I realized how rare that was. Like, it's not the typical story that chiropractors have coming out of school and mentorship and different things like that.
Yeah.
So I just realized what an awesome opportunity it was to be in my hometown with an amazing group of docs that have created such an awesome environment and have been really successful and helped me along the way. And I felt definitely called to go back and be there. But right now, finally, this is my end of my first month getting to adjust people. The first month was a lot of just systems and training, and that was great, but I was definitely getting that buzz, just wanting to get my hands on people. Like, I couldn't shadow anymore. I couldn't practice scripts anymore. I like wanted to get in it. And this month, I mean, it just flew by, and it's been so much fun.
Nice.
And challenging at the same time. Like, there's situations that happen almost every day where I'm like, oh, that's a new challenge that I didn't know was coming. But overall, I've had a ton of fun. But noticing at the same time, just the need for certain strategies to be implemented where I can continue to stay congruent with my values and, the way I take care of people, the artistry. Like, I can see where things can get jaded, or you can start to sacrifice on certain things. Especially,
do you have any examples?
So, Family First they see quite a bit of people. I think so. It's a pretty high volume, and so me, thinking back on our training, I'm like, oh man, I see, Brett and you, or John Martinez, or Eric Rubin, all these guys, and they take a lot of time with people, right? And I'm like, okay, and I'm in a lot shorter of a time frame, so it's just like I'm asking myself, like, how can I continue to maintain the artistry and the connection and the presence and communication all within a relatively much shorter amount of time of like 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of in the range where I'm at. And even then I feel sometimes I'm rushed. So it's just like needing efficiency, but not losing out on the connection with people. So that's a big one for me right now.
Yeah. What's been your strategy so far? What do you think has been most effective?
I think getting, really clear. One is with like the communication and the talk in the beginning of the visit. That's a crucial one. Like, there's a CA that brings them back and, checks in with them. And then, me, if I can just acknowledge that what the notes were with that person, then maybe I don't have to readdress certain things, and I can kind of go into the next step of the adjustment process and their experience. I think I've caught myself kind of re-going over what they've already shared.
With the CA?
With the CA. And that will it kind of takes up more time, and sometimes it'll get us off track. And especially when I'm trying to, move the conversation, I don't know about move the conversation away from pain, because I know that's a big piece of just being heard, but not trying to stay in that place for too long and trying to move towards function and education and what's going on with their life. I mean, that's a battle that I'll continue to have, is just like meeting people where they're at, but yet wanting to take them to new levels. Like, I don't always want to come down because then I can't raise them up,
Yeah. So the CA brings the person back, gets a check-in, and then they come and share that with you. They give you the notes, or do you get to the person and pick up the notes?
So I can just see the notes right on the computer. So when I come in, I can like check the notes, and then I can go right into a conversation with them rather than asking the same question that the CA already asked them with that.
Yeah.
Especially if it's how are you feeling today? How are you doing today? Kind of question that just leads you down into a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But
Cool. Well, that seems like it cuts out a lot of the chatter in the beginning, so then you can drop in, get hands on. Yeah. I know you mentioned that all the people that you mentioned take a long time. I know Eric Rubin does work for people for 45 minutes or something. He's got 8 tables or something spread out. I'm not sure how long John spends with people. In our office, we're 1 person per 15, and we're going to be switching over and transitioning to 2 people per 15. I know Brett sees like 6 people per 15 or 8 people per 15 or something. So he's only doing 2 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, someone needs a little longer. They might move into the exam room or something. But yeah, it's so interesting to hear just another perspective. I'd never heard of someone having the CA check in on the subjective a little bit to save some time.
Exactly. So yeah, that is really beneficial. And then also just having the expectations up front of what the adjustment experience is going to be like. I think that that's huge, and I'm continuing to work on that, especially when I'm doing like second days and different things. I want them with the understanding of like there will be an education piece as well. It's not just like, how are you? And then let me tell you about my symptoms and then me adjust you. Like set these expectations and agreements up front, so it's not this new thing that I'm just trying to implement all of a sudden midway through their care, And it kind of really trains them when I'm in that room about what's happening and what the experience is. And then we have like progress exams and re-exams for them to really, we can go into maybe some other topics, but really respecting that adjusting space.
Yeah. And it's also, that's kind of the art of facilitation, is how do you influence somebody in a way that they feel acknowledged and honored and heard, but they're also not just kept in that box. You're inviting them into a space of exploring stuff that is maybe outside of their comfort zone. And now, how has, what is the technique they use there, and how has the training you've done kind of matched in with what they do there?
So the biggest changes I would say is, so they do Blair for the neck, and that was the way I first got adjusted. And I think most people probably have an idea of Blair, but it's like a drop table technique with torque, and there's a lot of x-rays taken, and it's like it gets down to the nitty gritty on that front, which is, I wouldn't say it was different than the training that I did with school, because we get really specific when we're adjusting. So it still brought that level of intention, and then they do a lot of drop table for the pelvis and low back. And part of me is like, my ego is like, I want to do side posture, and I still have the freedom, right? I watch Rick, and every so often he'll put people in side posture and adjust them. And he's told me that from the beginning. He's like, you do it, whatever's best for the person on the table. So that's awesome to hear. And then, but at the same time, I'm like 5 minutes, like thinking about that. So that's kind of what I'm going through right now. So kind of working through just the drop table, and then the Blair for the neck is the biggest difference. And that's how, and then they have some other applications. What's the other one called? Pro Adjuster. They do that for some people who really don't like getting down on the table, or they just want to sit in this. Is that
the clickety clack, the machine gun in the neck?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of describing it.
I remember hearing that in the clinic at Life West. You'd be adjusting someone in the moment, in the presence, waiting for the Kairos, and all of a sudden it's like, clack, 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 clack. Oh, Jesus.
Right. Yeah. So some people, especially older people, they like that better. And Rick, he's got a big background in BGI, and he does some AK stuff, so it's cool to see his artistry. Each doc is still different in a lot of aspects, which I really appreciate. And cool. I'm just like so grateful for the background, that I've been able to come into practice with, knowing just what's possible. And I hope every year I'm slightly different than the year before, and then in 10 years, 15, 20 years, I hope I'm practicing in a way that I wouldn't even be able to recognize from this point.
Yeah.
That's when I know I'm evolving my application of the artistry,
That's something I heard yesterday was the masters are finding subtleties in areas where there's very little subtlety. Apparently, we over time are able to cultivate a sensitivity to something that looks so bare that how could you even find nuance in this? But what looks unnuanced, like a chiropractic adjustment. If someone who doesn't know what they're looking at on YouTube is going on, it's like, oh, pop in the neck, whatever. It looks the same. Mm-hmm. But over time we realize, oh, actually there's a lot of nuance to this. And so it's funny because even 20 years from now, you might look at yourself, and if it was you now looking at it, be like, oh, I mean, it kind of looks like what I'm doing now.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, so,
well, I was going to dive into, because you mentioned Blair, but I also know you did Ian Davis Tremaine's upper cervical program too.
Yeah.
So how did that training prepare you for being able to do Blair, and how did the KTC training prepare you to jump in and be able to adapt to whatever was coming your way?
Yeah. So okay, we'll start with Ian's. Again, I think I did his program just to dive in to see another application, and I resonated well with Ian. He's a really cool guy, and enjoyed interviewing him on the podcast. But it was pretty much, it was different. The X-rays that he took were different, and then the application of knee chest is a lot different, a lot more force than Blair. But I think each time training something different just allows me, like you said, to adapt quicker when I'm doing another application of the adjustment.
Okay.
But definitely with KTC, like there was especially with posture. So when I'm doing the Blair adjustment, some of it looks unsustainable a little bit. So I've really had to use the KTC principles of movement to like get my body in the best position where I don't think I'm breaking myself down over time. And actually, that's one of the things I want to send a video in is me doing a Blair adjustment and see where maybe the energy leaks are at in that posture, because it's quite different. Just the setup in kind of the shoulder. There's a lot of internal shoulder rotation, and then you quickly use the torque and get to external rotation. And you're kind of in this hinge, but it almost feels like my back's rounded a little bit at the top. So I'm just like, what's going on here? I think I need someone to look at it from a different perspective. But I mean, KTC, it's been huge, in learning and just adapting to learning Blair with body position, and then always having the intention and the subtleties and the moment and the window. I mean, it's all still the same, just finding that Kairos moment in that piece, and seeing how they're reacting to my setup on the table, on their neck in different places. So yeah, I think it applies definitely. Cool.
I'd love to see that video. I know that I've maybe seen a couple of Blair adjustments, and it kind of looked like the Fuji Bucci. There's kind of that high torque, low amplitude, very quick, pretty fun to watch for sure. I'd love to try to slow it down and see what's actually happening in there. I see a lot of, actually, when Brett does his dry toggle sometimes, if he's doing a more superficial dry toggle, I'll see him whip that torque pretty significantly, and find myself training that quite a bit.
Right. Yeah, and that's another thing too, is learning the principles of Blair, and then it's really awesome for if you have like an anterior listing, or if that's what you're finding, an anterior indicator. It makes that really accessible. And I know we train anterior adjustments too. It's just another way to do it on the drop table. Yeah,
nice. So something I would like to dive into now is your history as the interviewer, the Artful Chiropractor himself. You took this on fifth or sixth quarter, and all of a sudden you had basically weekly, if not more often, access to docs throughout the profession, a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different philosophies, all somehow connected to training the art of chiropractic. And I'm curious, how has this experience been? How has it impacted you as a person? How has it impacted you as a chiropractor? And we can start with that. And then I'd love to hear, like, what have been the biggest aha moments and takeaways that you've had from some of your guests, and how have you used that in your life?
All right. So starting off, the biggest thing that came to mind is the fact that I was able to connect with such a high level human being, like every week, just about. And that alone had such a huge impact on me, and like kept the fire going inside of me. I would get done with some of these conversations just like on fire and so excited about chiropractic and gaining that throughout school. Whereas I saw some of my classmates every single quarter was like beating them down just a little bit more. And, I've been so lucky to be able to have these conversations with these docs and, high influencers, that the inspiration was constantly there. So I think that was a huge, takeaway from being able to do the podcast throughout school. And then just the influence on me as a chiropractor, just the possibilities that and the places that I could go just kept expanding. Like I would think I would have an idea of what I thought was right or what I thought was the best way, and then I would hear something else from another amazing chiropractor, and then next week was something else, and there was always these subtleties from person to person. I'm like, wow, I will be a student till the day I die. Like there's no way that I can even come close, and that's what I think makes it so much fun. And the vast majority of chiropractors, and a lot of times chiropractic students, have no idea of the different ways and the different applications of communication, the adjustment. There's just so many ways, and you could still be a master at them in whatever you kind of decide to do. So just keeping that, it keeps me in the student mindset. And I've gotten the feedback sometimes of like, maybe I'm playing in that space too much, where I'm just a student and I'm facilitating a conversation and not necessarily taking the lead or stepping up in that way. Even though I have gotten that feedback that the transitions of the podcast, even Rick, he's been listening to him from the very beginning. He's like, it's been so cool to see the transitions of you as an interviewer, kind of stepping up in that ownership of my opinions or my beliefs and different things like that, and being able to contribute to the conversations differently. And then the last part of your question, what was the last part?
Well, let me segue real quick let me tackle into that a little bit, because I think the transitions have been, I think, subtle, because I think you've made such a gradual trajectory in your learning curve as an interviewer, but I've definitely been intimately involved with you in this way. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what have been the transitions? What were the hardest things for you and the most challenging aspects of you interviewing in the beginning? What do you think happened? And then what were the hurdles that you overcame to step into that next phase? And if there was multiple phases, I'd love to hear, what has your path been from the inside of your mind as the interviewer? Because we've all got to see the results and the episodes and the product, but what's been the process from your perspective?
In the beginning, there were so many podcasts where I was so nervous to interview somebody. And, I knew that I had to do it and take that step. Once I kind of got into it, I felt a little better, but I was just so focused on maybe the questions or, just doing it right and doing it perfect. And it was kind of robotic, and that was really challenging to get over. I still remember the first time we pre-recorded something. Oh no, we recorded it for the facilitators, I think. And it was like the very first recording, and I was like reading off a paper, trying to remember, and just totally botched it. And then, Brett was like patting me on the back, and then at the very end, you guys are like, then there was one, so it was like the very first time. So just dealing with the struggles and the self-criticism, I think, after an interview was done, that was really challenging, getting done, getting off the interview and just like cussing myself out slightly for a few minutes because I thought it was, I just did a shitty job. And a lot of the times that wasn't the feedback, that I would get from people, but it was, I guess I had those expectations of myself. And I think once I started to become, okay with that, I just knew like every interview I'm going to get better, and I'm going to continue to try and enjoy this process rather than kind of let it pass by because it's so uncomfortable, and then wait till 150 in where it's like I could do it in my sleep, and it doesn't give me doesn't get me as amped, as it used to. So that was the big transition. And then that transitioned into kind of coming into my own a little bit more of like the confidence and the certainty and being more authentic with reflections and asking genuine questions that came up, like what's the word for those? Just like a follow-up questions. I think that's where I really kind of took off, is just being able to be present and listening to them rather than thinking of the direction I wanted the podcast to go. So that was another big transition for me, was that just not being so attached maybe to an outline that I have, and just allowing it to authentically go in that direction. Another transition was just dealing with new guests, like every single time, like different personalities, different styles. I mean, they were not always extremely comfortable either, right? So just how can I create a safe space, like instantly? One of the most challenging things that I didn't see coming within a podcast is I'm going to talk to them for a few minutes before, and then I've got to try to create this space where they don't feel like they're recording and it's going out to a ton of people. And, I think when I was starting to interview Autumn Gore, like I was in the 30s, I got that feedback, from her and a few of the other Dallas docs, that it was like, oh, I felt really safe, like to explore maybe some more depths. So that was another transition.
She had a great episode too.
She did, man. She's one of the most heavily downloaded.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, I see some themes from what you're saying that parallel with KTC a lot. I mean, parallel with everything. That's why we talk about it in KTC. It's right. The unconscious competence, concepts, the 4 stages of learning, connection before correction, or connection before recording. That whole concept. And over time, as you drop away from the nerves, you gain the confidence and certainty, which allows you to be authentic and real and start to actually reflect and listen to the conversations, where then you can have the follow-up conversations where in the adjustment, I feel like it's the same concept. If you layer that over a chiropractic adjustment, you're listening to somebody, but if you are thinking about your own body, you are not able to hear what they're saying with their neck. And as your body drops away and you're more confident and certain, now you start to actually get to hear what they're saying. And then the next layer is that you get to respond to what that conversation is happening. And it's been cool to watch your process for sure over time with this. It's just another layer as a chiropractor. Communication is massive, because it's what we're really doing even with our adjustments, is delivering information, communicating to the person's body, and having that body communicate with us. And so our verbal conversation is just as important, like you already mentioned, even from a flow perspective, but it's also helping someone feel safe before you put your hands on, if it's their first adjustment, or if it's their 40th adjustment. How do you not just make it seem like the same old thing, but how do you create a space where they still feel safe to explore the unknown?
That's huge. Yeah, keeping that space creative and alive and new constantly, because that's what will episode 200 feel like, or 300. It's like, can I still show up with an intention? And that's the same thing for practice. It's like 10 years in, 15 years, 20 years in. How can you continue to show up with a unique experience for everyone that comes, to your table?
Yeah. Something else that you mentioned that is really common in our audience, just from having been to so many of the KTC events and having conversations and getting the feedback online, is the self-criticism, that internal voice that is so violent. Yeah. If you guys heard the most recent Tim Ferriss podcast, he's interviewing one of my favorite people to listen to, Seth Godin. I'm a huge Seth Godin fan. Seth Godin wrote a blog post back in 2010 called The Worst Boss, or The Worst Manager. And it's basically yourself. You are your worst boss, because if a manager or a boss ever talked to you the way that you talk to yourself, there's no way you would continue to work at that place. And if you were as unproductive as you are in a job, your boss would fire you. There's no way that the boss of you allows you to get away with as much as you get away with. And that concept it hit hard for me, and reminds me of that self-criticism that a lot of people, when they go to put their hands on somebody, maybe they're not confident at first, and their internal dialogue is just ripping them to shreds. Or they go to give an adjustment and it wasn't what they were expecting, and they're just completely demolishing themselves. And instead of learning from the fire, what can I do better next time? It's how has that internal dialogue for you changed at all since you've begun the podcast or since you even begun training as a chiropractor?
Definitely. There's been a huge transition. Like I mentioned, like those first 10, 20-ish podcasts, the self-criticism was so bad. And I mean, through sports too. Like I don't think I really started to make a solid transition until, my second year in school, probably like 20 episodes into this podcast for sure. And then it was a slow transition for me to really just know that I'm going to not be perfect. Like the adjustment is such a challenging process to learn. And the podcast, I mean, this is such a challenging process in so many ways. I've never done this before. Mm-hmm. And same thing with the adjustment or communication, like all of it is so new. And just to have that just self-love a little bit and acceptance that it's going to be a journey. And if I can have that, and because then I'll keep showing up, right? If that self-criticism was so bad in the beginning and I was failing in my perspective, then I would have stopped. Mm-hmm. And then I would never have kept going. And I saw that a lot towards the end of school, when I really started to get better with this, that some of these students who would show up to Adjusting Ninjas, it was so different, so new, and maybe they were not proceeding as quickly as possible, and then they would stop. Yep. And, I took that pretty heavy on me at times of not thinking that I created a safe enough space and communicated effectively that everyone's at different levels. Like, this is such a slow process of trying to learn. You just have to keep showing up, because then at some point you're going to get shoved into clinic, your 6th, 7th, 8th quarter, whatever it is, and you're going to have to go through it anyways. So it's just like, I'd go through it earlier, but then now into practice though, I have definitely worked that muscle a lot more, because I've had some failures in my, perspective. I don't view failures as being a bad thing, but some different, whether it's communication or it was an adjustment, like I'm a lot more easy on myself.
Mm-hmm. And is that something that you think came with time and repetition, and now you are better so you don't have to be as hard on yourself? Or was there a practice that you had to start to cultivate a higher quality conversation with yourself?
I'm not sure if there was a specific practice. I think it came from listening to people talk about it and having that conversation. I remember I was talking with Lauren Kodak about it a little bit, because that's her big thing too, is if you self-criticize so much, then you won't show up and do the adjustment. And she's working a lot with women and doing a great job there. But so it was mostly having conversations. I mean, we talked about it a ton, on the podcast as well. Yeah. And then it kind of slowly just sunk in a little bit. And now I know, like, I have a deep understanding that where I want to go is going to require me going into new things, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And that's like the only way I'm going to grow, and that resistance is going to always be there of not really, being happy with an outcome, especially if you're pushing yourself. Mm-hmm. But I also know that my self-talk can't be so bad to the point where I stop trying, because I'm afraid of that failure, afraid of that feeling. So now it's just slowly building that habit of acknowledging it when it happens. Yeah. That's the biggest part. It's like, there it is. There's that initiation of that conversation. And then now I can make a decision of how I respond to it. So that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah. I know you've done some meditation, you've done morning pages. So you've started to have a lot of those conversations with yourself where you are cultivating the ability to notice what you notice. And I've noticed over time your ability to be more self-aware. Oftentimes when people start that process, they start to verbalize it as well. You'll hear someone start to call themselves out verbally when they say something. The example, even in this episode, you were like the game. Oh no, not the game. The trenches. So that's like you caught yourself on a word and you didn't let yourself off the hook. You said, this is what I meant, and I think that's another example sometimes of when we have the spaces in private where we can call ourselves out. Right. Then it doesn't require as much of us when we are hands-on with somebody to be verbally saying to ourselves, shut the hell up, Lance. Close your mind off right now.
Right.
So
yeah. And another one on that note is, Ray Dalio talks about it in his book, The Principles of just like pain plus reflection is growth, and talk about a guy who's created, such an extraordinary life. And if that's one of his principles, like, all right, it's tough not to try that out at least, because pain, could happen every single day. And like, are you at least creating a process of like, all right, what was it? What is the story I'm saying? Is that true? What's the story I want to tell going forward?
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Just a couple more that I got. And one of them is, of all of the episodes that you've recorded, of all the docs and conversations you've had, of all of the lessons that you've gleaned from all this experience, what do you think has been the biggest takeaway? Whether that's something that someone actually said and you've never forgotten it, or if it was just a theme or a put together summary in your mind. But what has been the thing you carry with you now as a result of having done all these episodes?
Ooh. All right. So I think in our profession, we've talked about the technique wars or the different camps and all of those different things. I think the podcast, interviewing so many different people from different backgrounds, and just my instant, connection and love for so many of them, has just allowed me to just have so much more empathy for every single chiropractor in this profession. And, really I will never be like so ingrained in my own philosophy, I think, of I'm right and they're wrong. I think that has been so instilled in me with this podcast that I'm so excited that I've been able to have that, because I want our profession to go to the next level and be able to unify on some level around some principle, but just, acknowledge the differences and accept those. And we talk about that on the podcast a lot with NVC and different things, but just that has been such an amazing experience. And even I see it so often, sometimes even us, like, we'll kind of distinguish, with the blare, or like popping or twisting or whatever that is, as and that instantly I feel like, that doesn't feel right, because I have brothers and sisters who are doing different things and I have so much love for them. So I just, I think chiropractors do that a lot to try and distinguish themselves. And I know it's marketing or whatever, but it doesn't serve us as a whole. And I think, my view of all of us, coming together on some level, that's really what the podcast has done. And going back to just having that beginner's mind, like, I know there's so much more that is possible, and I'm going to enjoy the journey, but it's so cool to be constantly continuing to see how I can evolve and what's possible with the artistry.
So empathy, unity, respect to diversity. Man, you've hit all the principles in this episode just naturally.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think the last question I have is something that I imagine the guests would want me to ask, and that is recommendations for them. So you chose to do something very uncomfortable in the midst of something that required a lot of you, starting a podcast, 5th, 6th quarter, in the middle of chiropractic school, on top of being a facilitator, on top of being a champion for life. And you've reaped the benefits of the work, and it has not been easy, and I can vouch for you on that. What would be your recommendation for those that are considering taking on something, whether they know exactly what it is, they're standing on the edge of the precipice and saying, I'm going to start a podcast, I'm going to start a magazine, I'm going to start a blog, I'm going to start a project that is going to be challenging. What was your internal dialogue at the time, maybe, or maybe in reflection now? What do you recommend the internal dialogue be for someone who's trying to make that decision and maybe needs a push, maybe needs a pull? And for some, it might not be a good idea. How do you distinguish between those options for people?
For me, in the beginning, the headspace that I had, was why I wanted to do it. And there was such a strong pull for podcasting and something that I really wanted to have in my life, and really it was more for my future practice. I think it starts really with that desire of like really why you wanted to do it. Because I saw podcasting as such an amazing way to communicate with people and to get a message out, and just how much the podcast that I listened to influenced my life. And I was like, I want to do that for people. Like, this is such a huge outlet that I can shift paradigms, change perspectives, like educate, like give people hope and challenge them at the same time. So like those were deeply rooted in me. And so when I saw this opportunity, as much as I was scared to start it, and I didn't think I was good enough, especially when I compared myself to you and Brett, I thought I was, so many levels underneath each of you. And then to do a project where both of you were in it was very uncomfortable. But that why definitely drove me into it. And I was going to be able to keep taking a step forward after so many times where I perceived myself as falling. So really reflecting on why and making sure it's not just this superficial fad kind of cool thing to do, and diving in. So like that would be, step one there. And then I always thought, like, I always told myself, as long as I was having fun and I was continuing to enjoy the process, I would keep going. And it never felt like a job or this extra thing that I had to do. And so I constantly was reflecting throughout that process, especially through school when things got really, really challenging. I really had to sit down and do I really want to keep going? And there's definitely, some texts and some messages and some external validation from our listeners that like would boost me up in just the right times, to give me that spark when I was feeling low. But, I would always refer back to the why of the podcast and how awesome it was to be able to give some of these students and docs just this little boost throughout their week and connection piece that they might be missing if they don't, have a community around them yet. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of something being, a bad idea, or when to get out, that's actually something that I struggle with, because I think one of my greatest gifts in a way is, commitment and seeing something all the way through. Like I'll just mm-hmm. once I say it, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to always do it. And that can get me into trouble when it's not serving me anymore. So that's something that people, I would have to say, would come from the reflection time, and that's something that's not easily built into people's lives. So especially with going on to a new project, just having these constant reflection moments mm-hmm. and checking in to see where you're at. And by the end of it, if your heart is still on fire, and or at least it gets the spark gets flamed again, then that's a good indicator that you're on the right path, and you're just going through the ups and downs of anything, any new project. But I would love to hear maybe your thought process on that, on the whether or not it's a bad idea, or you're going too far into something that isn't serving you and isn't the best avenue. Like how do you get out in time without allowing ego to take over, where you do something for way too long?
You trying to turn into the interviewer again, dude? Come on,
dude.
It's all about you.
I guess that's where
I love your thought process. I like, if you start with the why and remember to have fun and enjoy the process, even when it's uncomfortable, realizing that and connecting that the discomfort leads to growth. And if you can find enjoyment in that, that's wonderful. And I think commitment is one of the greatest characteristics you have, and that anybody can have. That's integrity, like following through on what you say you're going to do. I think where people run into trouble is when their commitment is not specific and defined, and they don't know what they're actually committed to. And if it's just a process, but there's no end game in mind, and there's no like check-in point, there's no like, okay, I'm going to commit until this is accomplished, or until this amount of time, or whatnot. And I think that is a great way to buffer it and to to make sure you check yourself and not just overcommit to something that can swell. Because something I think we've all heard is that things will grow to the size of the container you give them. And if you don't define the container, they will take up your entire life. I've learned that from running these businesses that, you start a new business and now it's not just the time periods during the week that the business is running. It's the text message threads that are going on all day, all night. It's international, it's nonstop. And if you don't put containers around it, then you won't know when you're overstepping. And so my recommendation is the same as yours. Start with why, have fun, connect the discomfort to the growth, and stay committed, but define your commitment. So I'm going to give this a year. I know that at the Facilitator camp, you had said like 500,000 downloads or something like that. So at least there's something specific that has been put down on what we're working toward. And you can get as specific as you want. It's like, I'm going to commit until the fun runs out and then I'm done. Right. Then you have to realize how low is your threshold for discomfort, and does discomfort equal not having fun, or is it still fun and engaging, and doing what you said, reflecting. I think that's great.
Yeah. And for me, a big piece of it was really putting like time constraints and when I was going to be working on the podcast, and really valuing my time. Because in the beginning I was like, I'll do it anytime I don't have class or training. Yeah. And then it's just like that will wear you down. So it's just like having these time parameters and boundaries was definitely huge. And just another piece to follow up on was, in the beginning, like it was so uncomfortable. Like there wasn't this, like I didn't have the skill in the beginning. Like, I actually want to post that first episode just so people can see it. Because oftentimes someone will listen to one of our newer episodes and they have such a different perspective compared to if you saw what it's like in the beginning. And that happens so often in our profession. They look at you, they look at Brett, they look at Jordan, Adrian, any of our guests, and I'm like, wow. And there's such a disconnect between where they think that they are and where they think that you are. And they just don't see the messy middle, that was to get to where you're at.
And even where they think we are and where we think we are.
Right.
We might come off super confident, but it's also the student mindset, Right. I'm trying to surround myself with people that I'm trying to be like. And hopefully we're always having the carrots and the sticks, a little bit on ourselves to try to keep ourselves humble.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that was a big piece for me. Just like now not putting my mentors on such a high pedestal. That's another big one. Yeah. And, just be like, all right, they're farther along in the path in certain instances, but I can get there. Like, we're still on the same level. You're not above me. Yeah. Brett's not above me. We can see eye to eye. Yeah. And that was a big part of growing. It facilitates that process.
Yeah, awesome. Nice, man. Well, if you do that reflection for yourself now, are you still having fun? Are you still connected to the why? And what is the future of the podcast? Where does this go from here for the people out there that want to know?
Definitely still connected to the why. The more and more people, the amount of downloads that we got that we took during the break, I was really surprised by. So it's just like, I still feel like it's still catching fire in a lot of ways. But I think, I don't know, I'm more excited now just that I'm in practice and I'm going to have these constant real-time experiences to reflect on, talk about, and to continue to raise the bar with who we're having on the podcast, and having it be like a big piece of my contribution to the profession. I love looking at it like that, and I still have so much fun. I love talking with people and the art of communication, and so many layers to it. And it serves me in a lot of different ways, and I have a lot more boundaries and respect for my time now, so it's a lot more sustainable in that sense. Yeah. So I'm super excited, and where it's going, that's a great question. I think continuing to bring on chiropractors and non-chiropractors who are experts, and then what we can attract to the podcast as we evolve and grow, I think will be pretty awesome. And then again, always mixing it up with different guests, different applications of the art, and constantly getting exposed. I think it serves like twofold in the sense of continuing to show our guests what's possible with different applications, And then at the same time, being able to connect with someone who doesn't do what you do or doesn't have the same necessary philosophy of an application of the art, but we can still honor each other and know that we're still chiropractors, first, before we can start to judge ourselves on how they apply the art or how they communicate,
Mm-hmm.
But
cool.
Yeah, man, I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, it's been an honor to work with you on this project. It's been an absolute privilege to get to interview now Dr. capital D, Raymond Daniels, practicing out in Reno, doing the things. Thank you so much, man, for all the work you've done. I know a lot of people have appreciated this resource, this outlet for them. And we encourage anyone out there who's listening, if you guys have insights that you have gleaned from this episode or other ones, feel free to look into the KTC community page. We usually post the episodes in there. You can comment below there. You can like the Facebook page. You can do all the stuff that people do for podcasts to help them reach more people. For us, it's more about getting the why of this out. Unity with respect to diversity, connection over correction, building empathy and acceptance, and trying to help people evolve the art of chiropractic and elevate human consciousness. So if you're on that train, if you're down with that mission, do what you can to help others find this so they know they're not alone out there and that they have other people out there training the art and are happy to be a resource for them. So Raymond Daniels, Dr. Raymond Daniels, thank you so much. It's been wonderful chatting with you, dude.
Likewise, man. I get to acknowledge you for a second, and just want to say thank you for one, just seeing something within me maybe that I didn't see before, and you've done such an amazing job of that all the way through. The amount of times in my head I was like, "Oh, are you serious, Lance? Really? I'm going to drive out there. And we're going to do an interview with Eric Goodman, and we're going to do it, live, Facebook Live or whatever it was, in person." I'm like, "You got to be kidding me!" After I've had like 3 finals that week, so you've put me in these situations that I would never have signed up by myself. Put me on a stage before the showing of our documentary. I'm like, damn it, Lance. Always, damn it, Lance. But then afterwards, I'm just like, wow, thank you for putting me in that situation so I can grow. So you do such an amazing job of that, and I wouldn't be the dude I am today without you, man. And I'm grateful to have you as a mentor and someone I can continue to learn from and work with. I'm definitely honored.
Thank you for saying yes, man.
Of course, brother.
To the benefit of many. All right, dude. Have a great day.
You too. Peace out.
Peace.
All right, TAC listeners, if you enjoy this one, head over to iTunes or Stitcher so you can subscribe to the podcast and get an automatic download of our newest episode each and every week. While you're at it, we love a review, a comment, a rating, anything that will allow us to reach more docs and more students and continue to raise the bar in chiropractic performance training. If you haven't yet checked out the artfulchiropractor.com, you can do that for show notes for this episode and previous ones, along with any of the resources that our docs are dropping. And if you haven't yet checked out the Kairos Training Culture Community Facebook page, you have to get there, send a request with a message of who you are and why you want to be a part of the group, because there are so many amazing golden nuggets that are being dropped every single day that are elevating the chiropractic performance game. So with that, I hope you all have an amazing rest of your week as always, and until next time, peace.